Well, welcome everyone to Multilingual Communication with River Visitors. So this is a River Management Roundtable. My name is Risa Shimoda and welcome you today. This is going to be pretty casual conversation because it's something that we'd really like to, the time that we'd like to spend learning from you and what you see on your rivers and questions you may have about this topic. And it's a pretty cozy group. We won't have a large group. So if feel free if you have questions, in between the slides and so forth, just to um, unmute yourself. And while we're speaking, try to keep yourself muted, but just chime in and we'll just kind of see what we can learn from each other. I'll hand it off to Angie.
Yeah. So this is part of our river management roundtable. Every month we do this, and Risa, if you want to go to the next slide. Monthly on our second Tuesdays, we get together and we have these conversations. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's invited, all sorts of different groups of folks. Again, we're here to have these conversations, help people work through similar, whether it's like an issue or a topic that people are trying to tackle, and share our experiences from river to river, and ask questions, share solutions, build our network of resources. So thank you all for being here. And then just a couple program notes for today. We are recording this and we will be posting this on the RMS YouTube channel. As Risa mentioned, when you're not speaking, we appreciate it if you can stay muted, just so we can reduce any feedback. And as always, we love to see your lovely faces if possible. If you have questions, again, it's a small group, so feel free to raise your hand, come off mute. I will be checking the chat box, however, though, and we can read things out from there as well. And then, yeah, just last part's about just being respectful, listening to each other, sharing the microphone and all that good stuff. So thank you again, and I'm going to pass it over to Jackie Diaz to introduce herself. And yeah, thanks, Jackie, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Angie, and thanks, Risa, for having me. So my name is Jackie Dias. I am a community planner with the National Park Service. I split my time between two different community assistance programs, one of which being the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program, and the other one being the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance program. Sorry, I always get confused with the community versus conservation. But in my spare time, I am a program coordinator for our local chapter of Latino Outdoors based in Western Massachusetts. And I am also proudly the daughter of immigrants. So I was raised speaking Portuguese growing up in my home because my grandparents didn't speak English. So multilingual communications out for folks, whether that be just making a outdoor space feel more inclusive, welcoming to visitors of all kinds, or whether that be sharing really important safety information. All that stuff is really important to me because I think that the outdoors should be a very welcoming and inclusive space for folks, no matter where they come from or whatever. So that is who I am, and I really hope that our session today can be a conversation. And yeah, like I am also not an expert. Like I am just someone who has done a lot of thinking about this, whether that be in my volunteer space, whether that be as like the tokenized like Puerto Rican on staff who has to translate a survey into Spanish, even though I don't speak Spanish, or like just doing a lot of thought into multilingual conversations or communications, especially on like river usage, where folks can actually take food home that might be contaminated and things like that. So Yeah, I guess I don't really have any. We have a few photos lined up for examples of different signs in different languages, which I think are really great examples. But yeah, mostly I just wanted to have a conversation and yeah, yeah, so some of the basic, so I think what is on the screen right now is mostly just like generalized guidance given towards different things like whether that be Latino, AE instead of Hispanic. So I don't know if folks know, but Hispanic, some folks who are of like Latino descent don't like the word Hispanic because of its ties with colonization being related to Hispaniola, you know, things like that. So folks prefer Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Latine. Latine is what we use for our local chapter of Latino Outdoors, just because it's the inclusive conjugatable term. Black instead of African American. You want to think about folks who access the location. You want to think about folks who live where you work, and think about reaching out to folks who who are already coming and what languages they're speaking. And think about the different dialects between those different languages. So like Puerto Rican Spanish, for example, is very different than like Mexican Spanish. And think about things like that. Just a lot of things to consider. But yeah, I mean, I guess I can pause here and welcome any questions or comments or things. Anything anyone wants to share. Any examples of communications that have been put out for folks that may have been taken in a different way, or like suggestions that you have heard that landed really well, or quite the opposite, I guess.
Yeah, I'll offer that this is from the I think Sport Fishing and Boating Council folks. So from some review they've done, and the second bullets are their advice to learn who's in your audience, listen to them, seek input from them, see how they self-identify. Because Jackie, like you mentioned, the difference between different Spanish-speaking countries, visitors are those who are from different Spanish-speaking countries. So I'm always curious when I'm in a store near me, because my community, there are no Mexican people. There are Guatemalan, Salvadoran, Venezuelan, restaurants, and they all have a Spanish sounding name, but they are different. So, and you mentioned because of your background, Brazilian Portuguese being really different than Portugal
Yeah.
Portuguese. And if you're part of one group and you see the other word reference, you might laugh or get insulted. One of the two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this guide that I found from this other group also says if you're going to do anything, just translate basic information if you can. And you mentioned welcoming, advising, warning, thanking, partly to communicate and partly to have your folks who are visiting, feel like you know who they are or that you care.
Yeah, exactly. Like I know, so internally to NPS, we have developed, or there was like a small group of Spanish speakers at the National Park Service who developed a Spanish language resource guide for parks across the country. And instead of trying to translate like a park name or something else, you can just keep it as a proper name, because that's what folks who are visiting the park are going to see all the time. But translating those messages, like welcoming folks, we can say like bienvenidos to Yosemite National Park, but keep Yosemite National Park as its name, because that's what it is. That's what's on the signs everywhere that you're going to see. Advising folks, warning folks, those are really important. And something else that Risa, you and I were, and Angie were talking about a little while ago was iconography, and how important that icons too can play in messaging for speakers who may not come from, like, may not be local or whatnot. Like, think about how when you're at the grocery store and you see like a caution wet floor sign and you see the little guy like, whoa, you know, like falling back, it's like, oh, okay, like I need to be aware that the floor is wet. Like I might trip and fall. But yeah, so those are the kind of things that I think about when I think about multilingual communications out to folks who English isn't their native language.
Yeah,
Hannah? Oh, sorry.
Hannah, please.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the third bullet point here of priority audiences instead of target, and just clarify that. I've heard both terms, but I never I didn't consider there was a better option between the two, or maybe even a difference. So could you speak a little bit more to the difference between those two terms?
Yeah, that one specifically, I didn't put it on the slide because made me nervous, but priority instead of target, because target now invokes violence, implies some violence. And when you're thinking about people who you're reaching out to specifically, you know, for example, the groups that we've just talked about, they might, and so this wouldn't be a word that you would be saying to a person as you wouldn't see either one of those words when you're greeting them, but you'd be using those words when you're talking with the group that is going to be engaging with them, like the local Latino Outdoors group. It's a little bit safer, I guess, a new PC term, but for reasons that are, are now more important than they might have been a few years ago. Makes sense?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because so like in some of my experience with Latino Outdoors, a lot of our goal was to develop community-centered outing events to get folks outside. That was like our goal, was to just get folks outside recreating in whatever way possible, whether that be for their first time or for their millionth time. And however, when we would meet with some organizations to partner on events to, for example, gain access to their land, if it was a land trust or whatever, some folks would give off the like, oh yeah, like we're trying to target to get more like Latino people in the woods or whatever. And it always feels a bit like Risa's saying, it feels a bit like, like it's not a very welcoming environment that you're developing. And so something that at Latino Outdoors we strive for is to, and I put this in like quotes, like rewrite the traditional outdoor narrative. And so we want to develop a space where folks of any background can come and recreate in a place and feel welcome and not judged, and not feeling like they have to have like the newest this, that, or the other thing. But the same thing goes with messaging and language that they see along the trail too. Like I know personally speaking, whenever I go and like recreate outdoors, if I see a sign also in Spanish, I'm always like, oh my God, like that's so cool. And I've even seen some in Portuguese, mostly because of the place that I live in the world. Like I live in and based am in Springfield, Massachusetts, but especially if I go out towards Eastern Mass, where there's a lot more Portuguese immigrants from both Brazil and like mainland Portugal, there'll be signs also in like Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And I'm always like, oh, like that's so cool. Like I feel like actually seen, you know, like, huh, that's really cool. Like I'm so happy. But on the contrary, like also thinking about that kind of stuff, like I do know that a lot of not a lot. I don't obviously know the actual percentage, but something to consider when thinking about multilingual communications is that some immigrants can't read or write, period, whether that's in English or like their native language, for example, my grandfather, who was able to bring his family of 5 over from Portugal to America, never was able to read or write a single word in either English or Spanish, or not Spanish, Portuguese, besides his name, and he would get confused and like he would see my name, which is very similar to his name, and would be like, open my mail, and I'm like, Vu, stop opening my mail, just silly. But yeah, like it's so, and I know that that's a common thing too, like folks who may be coming from countries where the educational system is not the best, or like social things aren't great, so they come to America but they're so illiterate, so it's kind of hard to know that though, and to like whatever, but to prepare for that and think about things like iconography and the words that you're using, like the text, the font, the colors, if something's like dangerous, to have things like big letters, but yeah, I'm also, like I said earlier, like I'm hoping this can be like a conversation I can learn from you all too, because like I said, like I'm very honed in on the Northeast and Spanish and Portuguese as my default secondary tertiary languages here. So yeah.
Okay, let's go to, we did a little survey to RMS members just to get an idea of what languages are used as a secondary language, or what language represents those who are most likely to be non-first English speakers, or English as first language speakers. So here are just we have a couple of pictures that we got from I think they're all from Park Service websites. So that sign is on the Appalachian Trail. It's in Spanish also, but by far there was only one person who said who didn't say just Spanish. People who use another language is primarily Spanish, and so we didn't see any of the people who use Portuguese on their signs, and the other one was Russian. So in the United States, it's very, very not polarized, but centralized. The two most frequently spoken languages besides English, and it might not even make sense, but is Chinese and French. So we didn't hear any of that, but those are yeah. So we heard Spanish. That's what people use if they're gonna include another language in their signage. And then a couple other questions. This oh, does anyone know where this came from? You can guess, maybe. From Samoa.
I was about to say Samoan, or like some kind of like Pacific Islander language.
So it probably isn't surprising if you're in a national park area on Samoa, that would be common. It would make sense for signs to be in both English and Samoan, or just in Samoan. And this is not unlike that. Actually, this is the cutest sign that I saw that was in 2 languages. But this is not unlike the priority communication from the Fishing and Boating Partnership slide, where if you are communicating in another language, what is it that you're telling people about? So these are the main ones. Safety, which is good, or warning. Safety could be best practice, or safety could be a warning about a hazard. Welcoming people, and or saying thank you for visiting at the end. Signage in bathrooms, that's always a really smart place to put a sign, because people all go there. And then interpretive signage, which I think, like this COVID sign wouldn't be included in that. It also might include stuff about flora and fauna, or cultural or historical stuff too. And then if you are sending people to another place as a way to communicate to them in another language, what are you sending them to? And this is what people told us. Rules, maps, important in, this person works for Forest. News, what's current in our unit, an inclusive welcome, river surveys to tell them what might be popular or what they need to, what's going on. And then payments, if you're sending them to go pay a fee or something like that, it's in their language. And this seems to me like a QR code sending people, assuming you have decent Wi-Fi or decent coverage, seems to me like the most flexible, cheapest really way to go. So you could just send them to a place where that could change, that could get updated all the time, and you're not printing and installing and paying for metal and things like that that have to deal with weather and all the things that can wear down or break or where use up, facilities on site. Here's a kind of a more ambitious sign. This is in DC, Kenilworth Gardens. It's an interpretive sign, but it's got a bunch. And again, it's in Spanish. But this is a pretty big commitment to another language. Something that's, this elaborate. It's a big old sign. And again, it has more information with the QR code. So even the Park Service here is utilizing that. Another sign, another Park Service sign. And then this one, Angie was mentioning this too. This is a little bit different. It's less a sign to help a local person who doesn't speak English or might speak English but not as their first language. It might be something that's sort of helping a local who does speak English learn about a language that's been spoken by somebody else for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think when I saw this one, I brought up the anecdote where a few weekends ago I was going for a walk in the woods like locally to me, and it was on a land trust land, and there was just like a little box like set up in the woods with a glass panel, and inside it had a lot of like laminated sheets with text and like translations into a local indigenous tribe, the Nipmuc language, just in there, like right next to a bench. It wasn't really well like, oh, this is what you're gonna find in here if you open this box kind of thing. It was just like I was like, oh, what's in here? Like me just being curious. But I thought it was really cool to be able to have that little thing to look through, because that's the language that has been spoken on that land for thousands of years. And so it was pretty cool to try to read through some of it and try to learn some of the words associated with the land that I was on. So I think that that's also a really cool opportunity too.
What kind of content was in there? Like what
It
kind of
was, yeah, it was mostly like, oh, a tree, like tree in Nipmuc is like whatever, like, things like that. Like river is, it was mostly just, it was almost like a dictionary or like a translation type of thing, learned like by words, the singular words. It wasn't like a story or anything. Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting to learn like a new word or something. And naturally, I don't remember any of the words I learned, but it was still pretty cool.
Yeah, but again, it was more like this sign for your information.
Yeah.
If you're interested, this is what,
Yeah. It was more about it, and that I think was more about just like education, rather than, and maybe like awareness rather than messaging regarding anything like important or not, and not that it's not important. That's not what I read. But like Yeah, it's just more about like an educational opportunity to learn about the language that has been spoken on that land for so long. And, you know, if someone is of Nipmuc descent who walks on that trail and sees that, that might be really impactful to those folks too, to see that there has been like a concern, like an effort to educate the public on the language so that it's not disappearing or anything, like if they're still here kind of thing.
And what struck me about signs like that, and I haven't seen many, Angie said she sees some in her area, or she's seen some like this, is who this is speaking to, who is the priority audience. Because if it is English speaking people, you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know how to pronounce that word. It's in an alphabet or in a language that's not familiar. So that's the case, then it must be something for the locals who are familiar with that language to feel welcome or that they're being acknowledged. And that's like the purpose of the sign, which is cool. It's just, I'm not learning a whole lot from the sign if I saw it, if I walked by it, because I can only understand the English part. We have one more slide here. You know, this is, so if you're thinking about doing some signage or maybe even doing some website updates that reach out or appeal to those who are not English speaking, whether it's the like a Spanish speaking community or among community, or you know, within your area, or like that native sign. What would people like to know about something traditional that might be interesting, helpful, or enriching if stated in another language, which is more an interpretive cultural exercise as opposed to having people be safer or more aware of their surroundings.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest piece of advice, or a few pieces of advice, I guess, that I can give based on my experience is translation services is a skill, and it's one that should be compensated for. And just because you have a coworker or something that speaks another language, or the language that you're trying to the language of the audience that you're trying to reach, doesn't mean that it's within their job description to translate that information, you know? So they can definitely proofread and be a part of that team, but it's not their role to do that. Similarly, I think it's really important to partner and reach out to local like community or affinity groups that are a part of that community that you're trying to reach, or that do access the places that you're trying to translate materials for, because that is not only like a step towards making sure that they feel included and welcome, but if you're including them in that process, it makes folks feel like they have a voice and that they feel like they're part of the process. So I think that's really impactful. And yeah, those are like my two soapbox things of like, make sure you pay your translators. Translation is such a skill, and Google Translate does not do the job. It is not great.
As a best practice, what do you think? Because I've done this for good or for bad many times, is go to Google Translate and then have someone who knows the language tune it up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good like starting point. But even like I said, like I learned Portuguese and Spanish and English the same time. Like I don't want to say Portuguese is my first language, but like I grew up speaking both at the same time. And even when I Google translate something, if I like forgot into Portuguese, and I'm like, wait, this isn't even the word that like is what at least my family used or like my community uses, you know, because there are a variety of words that can mean the same thing, but different people use different words, you know? So Yeah, so I definitely think it's a good starting point, but like things like, so one of my colleagues on my volunteer team, he is a fluent Spanish speaker. He grew up speaking Spanish. Both of his parents are from Colombia, and he translates all of our materials. And he usually double checks using a Spanish dictionary on the internet. Like there's like a Spanish translating dictionary, and he uses that to make sure that it's kind of like there's this thing called like CNN Spanish, where it is without dialect, I guess. Like it's more readable and understandable to a lot of different folks rather than just Colombian speakers or Puerto Rican speakers or whatnot. But yeah, so so he uses that when he translates our materials. But even still, like some people may not fully get it, but for the most part, folks get it if it's like the blanket CNN type Spanish.
Is it like Spanish? Is it, or
Um,
is it hodgepodge Spanish
I
that?
think it's like hodgepodge. I'm not
Oh,
100% though, so I would have to double check.
mhm. No, that's interesting. Because that Spanish, isn't it the Z is like a TH, but they're the only all Central American and South American countries don't pronounce it that way. It's only in Spain.
Yeah, there's also like I remember, so anecdotally, I went to a inclusive science communication symposium last year, and I was on this community engagement cohort. So I was able to go for free because I do a lot of like community work with Latino Outdoors. And there was someone who came also who was a part of the cohort who didn't speak English. She was still learning English. She was from Bolivia, but she actually spoke French too, which I think is kind of funny. But so the organization that was leading the symposium hired a translator for her when we were on the internet. And when, when she first spoke, the translator, she had like a Barcelonan accent. And they have like a very thick lisp when they speak.
Yeah.
And my friend Sebastian and I were like, oh, we can't understand anything she's actually saying in Spanish because it was so thick, you know? But we could get like the gist of what she was sharing. But yeah, it was just so hard to like be like, oh, okay, it just takes a minute to like get used to, you know. But yeah, so there is like those little differences too between different dialects and different places folks come from and whatnot.
I guess if you're doing some kind of translation, you have to just be pragmatic about how
Yeah,
you want to be or can be, you know, because it's a bummer to think that you're going to go out of your way to try to be, more welcoming and then have somebody who's from Barcelona be bummed out at you, right? That
yeah.
would be sad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually, I mean, it's kind of interesting because like in the slide, in the photo that I shared with you all about from the Appalachian Trail, the translation into Spanish is slightly different than what is in English. Like in the English side, it says through hikers only, but on the Spanish side, it says something like you can only camp if your camping trip lasts more than like 2 days or something like that. Yeah, you can only camp if your camping trip lasts 2 or more days consecutively. So that's how they translated through hikers only, you know? So it's like kind of interesting. Because it kind of feels like, what do you mean you can only camp if if your camping trip lasts more than 2 days, you know, consecutively. So it's kind of interesting, but yeah, just and like, so if you translate it that way, are you therefore like excluding folks, you know? It's like, oh, I'm not allowed to camp like along the trail, you know, kind of
Right.
just
I would
things.
give that translator a B plus instead of an A.
Yeah, I don't know who actually translated this, but because I saw this just like on the trail when I was hiking in New Jersey. So
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, anyways.
No, that's the case where they kind of didn't they didn't translate correctly, kind of incorrect.
Yeah, no, yeah, because the following sentence is the same translated, but yeah, I was like, huh, yeah, that's interesting. Like, can only can. Anyways.
So if you were, say, if you were the person charged, not you, because you probably know better, but if you were the person charged with translating that, and what would you do to not make this mistake? Because that person probably thought they were translating it accurately, you know, or technically. How would you maybe just ask a couple people who knew Spanish to give you some feedback on it? And
Yeah, I would definitely try to reach out to local community groups that are of the affinity that of the demographic you're trying to reach. Like I know that there are like speaking from my own biases of Latino Outdoors. Like I know that there are a lot of Latino Outdoors chapters in the area where the sign was placed, you know, so I would probably reach out to them, be like, hey, like we're translating some signs along the Appalachian Trail. Do you mind like double checking our translation? Like if you saw this sign along the trail, how would you react? Or like, does this come across appropriately? You know, kind of like that type of demographic that transcends both just a Spanish speaker, but also like a recreation or like a trail user, you know, so.
yeah, that's a great example. Well, we're kind of oh, before we're done, I'd like to load the reference that you mentioned, the Park Service language lesson. So for folks who are in the audience, anyone have any questions or maybe a situation that they'd like some input on in offering information about your river in different languages, or how it is that you approach the translation so could avoid this Appalachian situation, Appalachian through hiking incorrect interpretation? Anyone else? Okay, well, we can just move forward, I guess.
Risa, there are two questions
Oh,
in
yeah.
the chat.
Oh, yeah. Please, I can't see them, so somebody else has to say them. All I'm seeing is the big screen. Please, somebody.
Yeah. So Hannah asked, how do you determine which additional languages to include on signage? Is it based purely off of nearby communities or a survey of site users or a mix? Is there a limit or best practice on how many languages a sign should have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because you know, like you want to base it on the communities that are nearby, but like people have cars, like people can take public transit, you know, people can come from all different places. So I would think that, and I haven't experienced this personally, but like having some sort of um survey system where recreation use is assessed in terms of like where folks are coming from, what languages are being spoken. So like I'm thinking of I am the river manager for the Housatonic Well and Scenic River out here in Western Connecticut. And yeah, Northwestern Connecticut. Sorry, I got turned around for a second. And we have this program through the Watershed Association called River, I'm going to butcher what the acronym stands for, but it's the Rio program. And every summer, they go out and they look at different river access sites, and they have a few, like each of the stewards that are working for like the summer, they've started to have one of the, not necessarily requirements, but like would like to have or whatever on like the application process be like a multilingual person or someone who speaks Spanish or Portuguese. And that has really improved the communication between the recreation user and the Rio steward who is going and meeting the folks who are recreating on the river. And so that is a part of their larger like community engagement program. But through that, they are learning that folks who are coming and using the river are coming from nearby cities who they mostly speak Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese. And it's been really impactful for the stewards who come and like interview them or like ask them questions informally, to be speaking in their language when they're talking to them, you know. So that's been really impactful from the last 2 years that they've been running that program. I know that they've seen a lot of or they've received a lot of really good feedback about that. So it is kind of like a mix. So you can base it off of doing activities like that and reviewing and being able going out to your river, having kind of like a river steward program, seeing who's actually using the river, and also like, you know, what Risa said earlier, like the number 2 most spoken language in the country is Spanish. And so you can start there, but also learn from who is actually using the site that you're planning on introducing multitude of secondary languages for. There is like kind of a joke that I think there's like a sign out in, I want to say it's on the South Shore, like south of Boston in Massachusetts, but I'm pretty sure there's like a sign at a beach with like 20 languages or something insane like that, which feels like a lot. But I mean, maybe, you know, like if your grandparents came from like, I don't know, Albania and you see Albanian, something written in like Albanian on the sign, you're gonna be like, oh dang, like, hey, that's cool, you know, but like at what point is it like, all right, like, you know, like how much is too much? So I don't know, I don't have the answer, but something to think about.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of wondering because Spanish and also French, you know, there's so many closely related languages that if you use one of those, you might, I mean, it might still work out anyway, but you know, that's not putting Spanish on the sign, it's not the same as putting Portuguese on the sign. So could you get away with it? Yes, maybe, but you're not, I mean, I think there's definitely a larger question of whether or not folks feel included if they see a Portuguese sign versus a Spanish sign.
Yeah,
Spanish might
exactly.
work, but not socially, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, like like I can read and write in Spanish, but I can't like speak Spanish to save my life because I just like default into the Portuguese accent and then people are like, what are you even saying right now? So, but it's really, I mean, I think it's really cool. Like whenever I go up north towards like northern New England and see all like everything turns into French because of Quebec, I'm like, whoa, like that's really cool. Like I mean, it's just something that I don't really see every day. But yeah, okay. Does that answer your question, Hannah?
Yeah, thank you.
It sort of depends on what you're communicating. You know, if it's a welcome sign, it'd be awesome to see it in 20 languages. You know, if there's a danger sign, you couldn't possibly, you know, fit it unless you have a billboard. You know, it would be too complicated. So there you maybe use a couple languages, but then go to the iconography. You know,
Yeah.
not go past here or you're gonna, you know, that kind of thing. And then other things are someplace in between.
Hi, Bud here. Can I throw in a few words? You got time for me?
Please.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a number of cases. One of the classic cases of language being both a barrier of communication was the General Motors car Nova. It was a huge success in the marketplace of North America. You know, Americans, Canadians bought it. It was great. So they released it into the Mexican market using the same name, Nova. And of course, Nova kind of translates no go.
Yeah.
So it was a big flop. in the Mexican market. I, I hike sometimes in parks, and you run across private land next to the trail, and there'll be signs. And the sign that you see most frequently is no trespassing. But occasionally you see these metaphorical signs, protected by Winchester. Now, if you're a foreign speaker, even if you're carrying a dictionary, you're not likely to figure out what protected by Winchester means. And, there was a case, I think about a decade ago, maybe 2 decades, in Louisiana, where a Japanese exchange student was invited to a party, and he walked up on the wrong house on the porch, and he turned around to leave, and the owner freaked out because it was a foreigner. He grabbed his gun and told the guy, freeze. Well, freeze is, a slang word, Monaco word. If you're watching TV, it's don't move, is what a policeman would tell you. But he said freeze, and the guy didn't know what it meant. And he was shot. Actually died, and the jury didn't convict. And I'm thinking of another thing, a kind of curious thing about a universal iconography. There was a case in Maine where a psychologist and his wife moved into a rural area, and the rural people weren't too welcome of people highly educated. And one of the neighbors shot the wife of the psychologist that was living there, and she died. And when the hunter was, of course, went to trial, and his defense lawyer argued that everyone should recognize the significance of a white tail, and to wear white gloves in your yard was like signaling that you were a deer, and the hunter had good reason to mistake this woman wearing white gloves as a deer. Of course, that's a bunch of nonsense, but it does bring to mind that we need something universal. Now, it's said that English is becoming the universal language. And, there's been other attempts. One time Church Latin was considered universal. Zamenhof invented Esperanto to be universal, but nobody has invented a real universal iconography so that icons can be used in place of multilingual signs. And that's probably the direction that we should be going, is to develop an iconography that's icons that are universal and have universal meaning that people can study in their own language before they venture abroad and run into problems with a language they don't speak. So those are just my thoughts, and I hope they were worth listening to.
Well, thank you. Well, we've heard that story about the Nova, which is kind of funny and also sad. And with the Japanese guy not understanding freeze, that's a tough one. How the guy who shot him was probably panicked, and he was too panicked to think about the person might not know English, or to not use slang words. That's kind of a big lift if you're thinking that someone just came to rob your house. Even though the person may well not have looked threatening and was walking away.
What's interesting is that the phrase is recognizable by an English speaker. And, it's all over TV and the gangster movies, and so people are familiar with it. But if you're dealing with somebody that speaks a foreign language like Japanese, and he's learning English, don't move is probably understandable, but freeze probably isn't. And that's one of the curious things about choosing the right words. I think that was already brought up in that Spanish translation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. But those all of your comments underscore how if you're going to use words, you should be pretty careful because there might be nuance that you might not be aware of. The Appalachian Trail one is something that probably affected some travelers who were, really sad that they couldn't stay or they thought they couldn't stay. Or planned and maybe planned inappropriately. It might not have been like where they got themselves in trouble, but it could have been certainly inconvenient. And the iconography, I think that's like a whole topic unto itself, as much there are standards in our parks. There, like I've gone to shows where there are standards for skateboarding or don't do this or do that, or and there isn't universal standard. Even bathrooms, like the men and the women sign, they're not standard because they're sort of similar, but artists get involved and one artist does not like to use that type of female sign. They're similar, but they're not the same. So if you go around the world, so
There's a real interesting book out. Well, the author was interviewed by on a YouTube video, regular video talker. His name was it's called Rob Words, by the way. But this lady invented a language that has less than 200 words. And it's a, the concepts are very general, but you can get a handle on a lot of things that way. And maybe a language that has just 100 words that could be used universally. Parks in Japan, parks in Korea, parks in the United States might work. But what is needed is that universal standardized iconography. If we don't have icons that are standardized, you can't go from one country to another, seeing a park and recognize the signage if it's in the language of the park. You can't go, for example, to Thailand and go to a national park there and read the signs if they're in Thai. And we could do, somebody should be working on standardizing the icons, and that would solve this entire problem.
it would help. It would help. Okay, well, thanks again for your thoughts. We have a couple more slides here. Other questions?
Yeah, there are a couple other
Okay,
questions
please go.
in the chat.
I might connect with Alyssa like offline about my role as a community planner and how having like multilingual communication comes up during my variety of projects because it's a lot. But yeah, I was just typing a response to Emma's question about, do you have any experience with interpretive signage that includes a QR code that takes visitors to an audio recorded translation of the sign? And she said, this seems like a good option to include interpretive information in multiple languages without having a huge sign with multiple translations, which I think is really cool. I haven't had any experience with that, but it did remind me of like almost like museums and how some museum interpretation like if you have like an audio tour or something, they will have multiple languages at like a museum. Yeah, exactly. And mostly because I'm remembering like yeah, just like some of my favorite celebrities have done like audio like recordings for a variety of translations, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, no, I think that's a really cool example. I just don't know the full like technological like availability. You know, at like different signs, if you like press a button, but it rains, like, is it gonna get like messy or something? Like how, like storage or just all the like logistical things. But I think that's a really great idea, um, for space saving. And then unless Emma, you want to like speak up and like continue on.
I was just going to add that we're doing 3 interpretive panels on the one of our partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers in the Northeast, and we're going to put a QR code with I think 3
Oh.
translations: Spanish, Portuguese, and I think maybe Mandarin. So if you're in the area, you can test them out and see how well they work.
Yeah, I'll come over. I'll make the drive.
Emma, was it difficult to figure out which languages you were going to choose, or was it obvious from your research or feedback?
I think we relied, so our main partner, the local watershed association, is pretty familiar with their, local constituents in the watershed. So they determined that those would be the 3 languages that would serve the greatest number of folks in their watershed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then I saw Christina had a question. Do you have any information? Do you have any sources for translation services? Does anyone have a sense of how much it costs to translate, for example, an interpretive panel? Which I don't. But I do know that there are a variety of like consultant organizations that's their job is to do like translation for a variety of different like nonprofits or small groups to make sure that their communication information is in the appropriate language and dialect and whatnot. But I don't have any experience like working with any of them. I just know of them vaguely. But I can also let other folks like speak up too.
It'd be good, Christina, to also seek someone who knows outdoor sports or the outdoor community. So if you had a reference to a river or a trail, that they wouldn't do like what that person did for the Appalachian Trail sign. That's pretty bad. Just they translated it literally, and they didn't have the context of what a through hiker, right? Or so it would be maybe just something that you put in your request for a bid if you are looking for translators. Okay, if we find any, then we'll let you know. Any other questions?
I think that's it for questions. And I see we got about a minute left. Big thank you to Jackie again. We'll be putting this on the YouTube channel as well as sending it out to everyone who registered probably tomorrow morning. And you can share it with folks as well. And then some upcoming events that we've got coming up next week. On the 18th, on Wednesday, we're gonna, as part of the A- Collaborative webinar series, we're gonna be having a topic, men as active allied partners in the workspace. Also, just a couple other events coming up. We've got a short course, a virtual short course that's on using fluvial geomorphology to improve stream restoration and watershed management. That's going to be coming up in November. We also have another one of those next May. So if you're interested in finding more information about that, I'm going to throw some links here in the chat. We've also got an RMS chapter trip coming up on the James River for those in the Southeast chapter, and as well as the 11 Point River in October. So check those out. We've also got more events, such as like our next roundtable. We'll be having some details come out soon. You can find that on the River Training Center webpage and our event calendar. And then last but not least, we've got a survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the roundtable. We appreciate any feedback you have, so I'm putting the survey link in there as well. Also, when you exit out of this Zoom meeting, it'll pop up on your screen. So thank you all again. This is some great conversation today. So
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
all.
Jackie. Thank you for attending, everyone.
yep. Thank you. Have a
Thanks
good
all.
Jackie. Thanks,
Nice job,
everybody.
Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.